My family loves baseball. They live and eat and breathe baseball. I am not so interested in baseball. I'm really not interested in any organized sports. I don't get the thrill of seeing grown men chase ball around a field, but they happen to love it. And I think it goes all the way back. It goes back to the previous decade. In the 1930s, my great Uncle Ed was a professional baseball player. He was a pitcher for the Boston Braves. And in those days, professional baseball players did not make very much money, so he had to have a job in the off season. And his job was to drive the city bus. He drove from one end of their little town to the other end of their little town. And all the local kids would hop on the bus so that they could be with him, so that they could hear his stories and just hang out with this really cool guy who was kind and gracious and had this larger-than-life personality. I knew Uncle Ed really well. He only died about 10 years ago. He was well into his 90s when he passed. And he was still telling wonderful stories and was just an amazing gentleman. So to put this in perspective, I often think, could you imagine this happening today? Could you imagine the pitcher for, say, the Boston Red Sox driving the city bus and all the kids hopping on at the stop so that they could hang with this great guy? That might be the beginning of my family's obsession with baseball. In the 1950s, my great Aunt Hannah, who was Uncle Ed's sister-in-law, she was a waitress at the steakhouse in their little town outside of Boston. She was an amazing waitress. She had a great ability to remember everyone's order. The woman did not own a pencil or an order pad. She would go to work, guests would be seated at her table, they would tell her what they wanted to eat and drink. She would go to the kitchen, get it for them, and get the order right every single time. People would try to trip her up sometimes. There was another famous baseball player by the name of Ted Williams, who was a Boston Red Sox. And he and Aunt Hannah really liked each other. And he would come to that restaurant every week. And he would bring a bunch of the other baseball players, and they would request to be seated at her station. And they would place their order, and there would be substitutions and special orders and all kinds of ways that they might think of to trip her up, and she just always had a smile on her face, and then she would go into the kitchen and come back with the exact right order. But while she was in the kitchen, they would get up and change seats. So when she came back, each Red Sox was sitting in a different seat than they were when she had left. She still got it right every single time. So she was pretty famous for this. And as much as our family loved baseball, baseball loved our family. So my parents got married and moved to Long Island and became Yankee fans. And I wasn't really interested in any of this. As a kid, I was more interested in solitary pursuits like reading and knitting and mosaics and macrame and all kinds of cool things that I did creatively. But I would hang out with them while they were watching baseball, and I'd be doing my thing. And I never could tell you what two teams were playing, but we were all happy to just be together. And then in about the 1960s, the Mets came to town, and my sister was the hugest Met fan imaginable. For her 6th grade graduation, my mother took her to a doubleheader, a Mets game. In the first game, the pitcher pitched a no-hitter, and that was very exciting for my sister to see as a little girl. In the second game, he actually came and sat 2 seats away from her. She was over the moon, excited and thrilled. He signed her autograph book. She still has the autograph book. And she is still telling the story, and it is over 50 years later. As a grown woman, my sister has a bucket list. her bucket list is to visit every Major League Baseball stadium in the U.S. She has already been to 16 of them with 14 left to go. From every baseball stadium, she brings back a ball and a pin. I don't get the attraction. I still don't get the attraction. My mom was a great Yankee fan. And in the 1990s, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. She was diagnosed rather late in the disease, and so she had to have surgery and radiation and chemotherapy. And she was in pain quite a bit, but the Yankees uplifted her and really took her mind off the trouble and the pain that she was experiencing. She had a great big overstuffed blue reclining chair, and she had a little Boston Terrier puppy, and she had crackers and jelly, because when you're having chemo and radiation, you need to eat all the time. Years later, my sister commented that she never did understand why the puppy's head was always so sticky. She hadn't realized that Mom was sitting there eating crackers and jelly all the time. So my sister worked days and I worked nights, so we would both get to spend a good amount of time with Mom. And she was watching a baseball game and I was sitting on the couch and we were chatting, and it might have been a playoff game or a World Series or something. I wasn't really paying attention to that because I was just enjoying my mother's company. But it was a very exciting point in the game. And I'm chatting away, and my mother turned around and looked at me and said, "I really don't know where you came from. How could you not be interested in this? This is so exciting. And you know, Joy, if it's the last thing I do, I will make a baseball fan out of you." And I said, "Not likely, Mom, not likely." A year later, Mom was in the hospital, and it was at the end of her life. And we were there helping her and spending our final moments with her, my sister, my niece, and myself. I was holding one hand, and my sister was holding her other hand, and my niece was giving Grandma a foot rub. And on the television was a baseball game. And nobody was really paying attention to the baseball game. We were kind of just talking to Mom and holding the space for her to be able to pass over. And I looked up, and the baseball game caught my attention out of the corner of my eye, and Derek Jeter hit a home run. And how do I know this? But I looked at Mom and I said, "Look, Mom, Derek Jeter just hit a home run." And with that, my mother took a deep breath and let it out, and she was gone. And after a little while, I realized that she had said if it was the last thing she did, it would be to make a baseball fan of me. And she did. Thank you.